Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata. Well, the political season is heating up. It's filing week. Well, it was filing week last week anyway. And we're going to give you a rundown what we have so far in the second segment of the show today. In the first segment, we're going to go back and review the top 10 issues for basically 2022 in a show back in January, which you can review on ncwlife.com. We went over the 10 top issues facing the United States. They're significant. And we're going to review those today, go back and take a peek and look at how those are shaking out. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Is anything getting done? I think you're going to be disappointed in the results, but we're going to take a look at each one of those 10 top issues. All right, just a quick newscast. All right, so we have a situation, and we'll cover a lot of this in the segment on the 10 issues, but look, inflation's now at 8.3%. That's down from 8.5, but still a very big problem for this administration and for the country. We have a stock market that's dropping like a stone. It had a horrible week last week. Let's hope that it settles down a bit. We have gas prices moving over $4.50, setting records across the United States. Diesel over $5, which ripples through the whole economy. Even interest rates going up again. The average 30-year mortgage rate is now around 5.5%, up from 3% just a year ago. And there's another hike coming in June. So we talked about a few weeks ago, the perfect storm. This is not a good situation, and the supply line situation is getting worse, not better. We'll talk about each one of these in the next segment, the top 10 issues for 2022 and where we're at just 5 or 6 months into the year. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Well, earlier this year in January, we talked about the 10 biggest problems facing America, and they are big. And we wanted to go back and revisit those one more time and see if we've made any improvement on any of them. We're almost into the 6th month of this year. And frankly, I think you're going to be disappointed to hear that about 9 of them have probably gotten worse, and only one might have gotten a little bit better. So let's dive right into the top 10. Now, if you go back to the show, which is archived at ncwlife.com, you can watch this presentation on the top 10. I went back and looked at it, and not much has changed, but let's run it down. Here's, we listed the number 10 issue, and it was an issue that was fading at the time, but still in the top 10 was COVID. You know, COVID, we still had the restrictions, we still had the masks, we still had a lot of issues around COVID. Well, since then, COVID has more or less come off the plate. Now, there still is issues with employment and getting the booster shots and all the things that go with that. But for the most part, it's faded from the news. Now, recently, we have seen a little bit of uptick, supposedly, in positive tests and some infections. And there are some hot spot areas across the United States and in other places in the world. As you know, China's had a very strong zero-tolerance crackdown in some of their cities. And now North Korea is reporting some issues as well. Europe looks to be okay at this point. So I'd like to say, yes, COVID's off the table, maybe even off the top 10, but it's not over. And it could come roaring back at any time. We'll just have to see how things go. For number 9, we had an issue that has been talked about for several years. I think it started to get worse with the Trump era, but media bias. Nothing's changed much in media bias. It's still people are staking out their sides, one side or the other. But some of the big stories that happened since the first of the year was Elon Musk trying to wrestle Twitter back into ownership of Twitter. That still hasn't happened at this time, but there's still negotiations. It looks like he may or may not. But the idea was to, from Elon Musk, is to get it back without all the censorship, without all the issues that he saw in that particular social media platform. Another story was that CNN tried to launch a massive online newscast. They took some major players from Fox and others to put this entire streaming program together, and it lasted exactly 30 days and was canceled. So they didn't go anywhere with that. The Trump media, Truth Social, this is the Trump social media site, Trump that Trump put together, Truth Social, has struggled to get going. There is a waiting list to get on, and once you get on, it seems like it's a little bulky. I don't think it's quite panned out to be what it could be, and maybe it will, but right now it's not really the major factor that a lot of people thought it would be. There are several other stories around media, but the bottom line is there still seems to be a pretty strong bias between different news outlets, and I don't think we've seen much improvement in that area. All right, number 8, overspending and deficits. Well, we dodged a bullet, I think, by the Build Back Better bill, or whatever the Democrats called it in Washington, D.C., did not get through, thanks to Senator Manchin, did not get through the legislature, did not get to the president's desk, and so $3 trillion more did not get into the economy. And given the situation now with inflation, which we'll talk about shortly, that's probably a blessing. What's funny is it's kind of led the president, Biden, to say that he's reducing the deficit. After the fact, he was in total support of spending that $3 trillion, but now says, well, it didn't pass, so deficits are coming down. Well, the rate of deficit is coming down. We're still running in deficit position. The fact is the budget will come up again this fall, and all the projected budgets that we've seen spend more, as always, than what they take in. Now, the real problem here for the federal government is again, a lot of these issues are interrelated. The interest rate increases from the Fed, which are necessary to tame inflation, are also creating a much higher cost of borrowing. So the federal government is going to reach a point where they're going to have to make a decision to cut spending and put money into debt service or see much larger deficits. It's a catch-22. There's really no way for them to turn as interest rates continue to climb. So it'll be interesting to follow this in the fall, particularly in an election year, to see where they go with this. There is still talk of a 4th stimulus plan. I don't know why we would do that given the inflation situation, but there's still talk of that. Absolutely no improvement there. Nothing's changing other than the fact we dodged putting more money in and having higher deficits. So I guess you could call that a slight improvement, just thanks to one senator. All right, the labor shortage, that was number 7. That hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, it's probably gotten worse. It was primarily a problem for small business, but now we have it in a very serious situation. Pilots are in short supply, and so Alaska and other airlines are having to cancel major flights. And more importantly, the train system is now getting bogged down. Well, trains carry an awful lot of the freight that powers the station, that fills your shelves in your grocery stores, and those are having problems because of a labor shortage there. Over 700 people have left Burlington Northern and other railroads, and they're having a hard time putting crews together, which means the trains aren't running in the frequency necessary. Add that on top of trucking issues, and you have a real problem moving forward. Small businesses still having trouble getting folks. They've had to do reduced hours, or some restaurants have cut the number of days they're open. It's just a real interesting problem that doesn't seem to be getting solved. If anything, it might be getting a little bit worse. All right, number 6, we talked about the homeless issue. Now, this is focused a little more in some areas like Seattle. Seattle has made some attempts to clean up their homeless camps out in Woodland Park and other areas. It's kind of a moot point because what happens, these people generally just move to another area. There are still a lot of homeless camps, but what has really changed is that these camps are becoming a little more aggressive. The folks are getting, there's more criminal activity, more drug activity. They become almost a microeconomy, some of these. We'll talk about that in the crime segment coming up, but the homeless issue hasn't really been dealt with. Nothing's really changed. Some cleanups, yes. Now, I have to say locally, Wenatchee has tried to keep ahead of it, cleaned up the homeless camp down here on the river, and has asked those motorhomes that were lining up at the north end of town to move, although that's unfortunately what they've done is just move to other locations. But overall, Wenatchee has at least tried to stay ahead of the game. And I just want to make a little note here. I just returned from a 7-state tour. that Joni and I do every year. And the homeless situation in most of the states we went to is pretty much non-existent. In Utah, we didn't see tents. We didn't see the old motorhomes in many of the cities there. And in Arizona, we saw very little of it as well. It seems to be focused on the West Coast for the most part, although I know it's a problem across the nation. And let's move on to number 5. Number 5 is getting worse. It's the supply line situation. You're not seeing cars on dealers' lots. You're not seeing motorcycles and ATVs available. You're not seeing a lot of things increasing in let's say, in frequency. They're not turning out any more product. Now, a lot of this comes from the computer chip shortage, which still is a major problem for a lot of companies, but we have some new problems now. The supply line for food is getting questionable. There's a lot of talk that there will be certain food shortages in certain lines, and of course we've seen the baby formula situation. Out of the blue, we went short of baby formula, and of course now trying to get it from overseas and trying to get plants open. But we're in a very precarious situation here with the supply line because the other problem is transportation. I just mentioned it. Again, these all thread together. We have a problem with trains. We can't get enough crews to run the trains to get the product out. This is particularly true of fuel and that situation. And so the next supply line issue could not only be food, but could be fuel, and we're already seeing it. There are stations running out of diesel. There are stations running out of gas. This is just not a good situation, and it all compiles. If the trucks can't run, or if the cost of those trucks running gets higher, we may see supreme shortages in a lot of product areas. So that supply line system is getting worse, and no improvement whatsoever. Number 4 at the time, I think this one may have dropped back just a bit, but education issues. Public education is still struggling. They're struggling with funding issues. They're struggling with curriculum issues. And the fact is, a lot of people are bailing out. We're seeing a lot of folks in Washington State turning to homeschooling or to private schools. That's happening across the nation. As a matter of fact, an article last week said that the LA public schools expect to lose 30% of their student body over the next few years. 30%. Folks, the education system right now is a real problem, and there needs to be some leadership to get it squared away, to get back to the basics. If you remember a few months ago, or I think it was almost a year ago now, we interviewed a gentleman from Poland that said the way they got their schools back on track is went back to the old school of teaching, reading, writing, arithmetic, and pushing folks into job categories that were needed in terms of technology, and it has been a huge boom for them. Get out of the social issues completely, get schools back to what they do best. If that doesn't happen, I expect a continued exodus and continuous problems. Levies are starting to fail across the state. Tri-Cities, Marysville laid off teachers because the levies are failing because people have had enough. They're not going to pay these extremely high property taxes for poor quality schools that are not teaching what they would like to see taught. Well, the big one, this one probably is number 1 now, but it was number 3 at the time, inflation. And of course, driven now mainly by fuel costs. Fuel and diesel, fuel now approaching a national level that's never been seen, $4.50 plus average, and diesel now moving over $5 average across the U.S. This ripples through the entire economy. There's no question it will increase the price of food. It will increase the price of everything in a situation where we've already got an 8.3% current inflation rate. So inflation is getting worse. It is not getting better, even though the rate dropped slightly. The fuel situation will promote inflation throughout the supply lines again. And that goes back to the supply line issues, which if those trucks get too expensive, if they can't afford to run them, they're going to shut down. And that's just going to create more problems in the supply line. So this is a very, very difficult situation, and it's not, again, getting better. Number 2, and I think this one probably is really number 1 now, and that is crime. And crime is accelerating everywhere. We're seeing it even here locally in Wenatchee. And it's all kinds of crime. It's shoplifting, it's car theft. Car theft is just off the charts everywhere in the United States. Of course, if they can't steal the car, they steal the catalytic converter from under it. So that is huge. Shoplifting, again, is huge. Crash and dash. Stores closing in Seattle, many stores closing in Seattle because they cannot continue when people are just coming in and helping themselves to their inventory. And so the crime situation is actually accelerating. Murders, gun crime, everything is up, 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 especially in the big cities. So this, to me, will be the number one issue this fall when we look at these elections coming up. And that's one that's got to be solved soon because it's getting very bad. Our number one before was immigration. It hasn't changed much. We have basically unlimited immigration. People are coming across the border. The big shift there could be this Title 42 situation, which was holding some folks back. If that comes off and we still don't have a decision on that, we literally have an open border. The numbers coming across in April set another record. The question really becomes, where are all these people going? Some of the cities are feeling the heat down south because they can't provide the services necessary for these people, so they're shipping them across the country. They're busing them, they're putting them on planes, they're taking these people throughout the country, but they at some point have to have food and have to have a job, and so we haven't seen the end of this. And of course, the biggest issue with immigration right now is the drugs coming across the border in huge quantities. We had our own sheriff here to tell you about that. It's getting worse. There was a bust here in Wenatchee just a week ago, 3,000 fentanyl tablets. And what this is doing, too, is driving criminal activity. The gangs are back, folks. They're in the drug business, and they're expanding north. That's been a problem in Tri-Cities and in Yakima. It's now coming up into Moses Lake and Wenatchee, and, of course, it'll get worse as the drugs get cheaper and more available. And so there you go. There's the top 10 issues we were facing, to things we needed to solve from January, and frankly, nothing except COVID, and that wasn't solved by government. That just basically took care of itself. The rest of them, not so good. All right, well, what's going to change all that? I think this fall, elections could change that. So we're going to come back in just a moment and look at get a quick snapshot of the filings that have happened this week here in Washington State, and tell you about who's running for what. Now that there's still another day to go from when we filmed this show, but we'll give you the basics when we return. Welcome back. Well, it is filing week. It's a big week to set the table, see what's going to happen not only for the primaries, which are sneaking up very quickly. It's interesting our filing date's so late because the primary will be on August 2nd. Ballots will be out in the middle of July. So this is not going to be a long contest on the primaries, but of course this sets the table for the fall, which are there's going to be a lot of money spent and some very, very big elections. Let's take a look at some of the filings that are happening in Washington State. For state senator, this is Patty Murray's current position. There are 15 people filed. That's a little bit of a surprise. It costs quite a bit to file for that particular office, but 15 people have filed. There really is only one strong competitor at this part from the Republican side, or from this side. It's Tiffany Smiley, and we do think in the end that'll be the contest between Patty Murray and Tiffany Smiley. But there are 4 Republicans that have entered the race for state senator, and 5 Democrats. That's interesting, considering Patty Murray's probably a shoo-in for the Democrat nomination. 5 independents have registered for that spot, and 1 socialist is actually filed for state senator. Moving on to the House District 8, well, there's more folks than we expected in that one. That's Kim Schreier's position. There are at least 3 major challengers that have filed and have been working hard, but now there is 10 in the race. There are 3 Democrats, so 2 Democrats besides Kim Schreier have filed. That's interesting. 5 Republicans total, including the 3 major players that have been working the program for several months now, Reagan Dunn, Jesse Jensen, and Matt Larkin. We have an independent that has filed and 1 libertarian. So 10 people in District 8, and by the primary, that will obviously come down to 2. That is going to be one of the most interesting races. And by the way, we're hearing rumors that that race could reach $18 to $20 million in total spending before it's done. That's a big one for the House of Representatives, District 8. Secretary of State, well, Steve Hobbs was given that job when Kim Wyman left to go to Washington, D.C., and since he was appointed, he has to run again, and right now he is the only Democrat. That's a little bit of a surprise because there was a thought that Jay Inslee might have moved him over there just to get him out of the Senate, and that another Democrat would step up. So far, that hasn't happened. Again, we have a day to go, but it's Steve Hobbs versus 4 Republicans. And the latest entry, which is interesting, is Mark Malosha, former senator and former House member. I've worked with Mark, who jumped in, who is an expert in auditing. and he's actually a strong player, and he has entered the race. There is one independent as well. So Secretary of State has 6 candidates right now. District 12 here in our area, the 12th district. Right now, there is no challengers. It's interesting. With a day to go, Mike and Keith, our 2 House representatives, Mike Steele and Keith Gaynor, are all by themselves. And that one is a surprise to me, given the new district, but we'll see. There's still a day to go. All right, let's go down to the county level real quickly. Assessor, no challengers at this point. Auditor, no challengers. Clerk, our clerk is retiring, so there is 1 independent and 2 Republicans running for the clerk office here in Chelan County. Coroner is wide open right now, 1 player, and I think prosecuting attorney, Robert Sealby, looks like no challengers at this point. Now, a surprise late entry in the sheriff's race. Brian Burnett, the current sheriff, will be challenged by Mike Morrison. Those are the only 2 so far, so it looks like not much of a primary there. They would both transfer. Treasurer is running unopposed at this point. District County Commission, this will be probably the biggest local race. There are 2 Republicans, Sean Smith and Zachary Miller, and 1 independent, Ann Hessman. This probably will be the predominant race, or the most money spent on a local race. I think that one's going to be very interesting. That is for the seat being retired by Bob Boogert, who's leaving. And Bob, of course, ran as an independent as well. Judge for Superior Court, looks like Robin Jordan right now has no competitors. That could change. District 1, however, the District 1 court, position 1, Alan Blackman against John Boland. So there will be a race there. Looks like Kyle Mott is on his own in District 2 at this point. Last but not least, filings that nobody usually pays attention to, but PCOs. There is a bit of a PCO battle going on out there. This is for precinct committee officers in your own neighborhood, and the Republicans have filed 24 so far. I expect that number to go up, and the Democrats have filed 16. There's more activity in this area than there has been for some time, and it'll be interesting to see how those numbers work out. There's almost 90 precincts, 90-plus precincts in Chelan County, so it doesn't look like they're all going to get filled at this point, but we do have a day to go. Again, there is one day. We'll review this next week. When we come back, we're going to talk about the final races and how it all lays out. We'll be following all these races moving forward. Of course, the primary, again, sneaking up on us. We will be watching that very carefully, because that will set the table for the final event in November, which looks to be very interesting. Primaries across the United States are happening right now. You're hearing about them. And the results are really interesting, and we'll keep an eye on those as well. All right, we'll be right back to wrap it up at the 12th District. All right, well, there you have it, a rundown of the top 10 issues, unfortunately not getting better, and setting the table for the elections this year. And folks, that is probably the one thing that can turn things around, is some leadership at the top. We don't seem to have it right now. I don't care which party leads, we need a leader. There are significant issues facing this country. There are ways to deal with them. We just aren't seeing it happen right now. So I encourage you to take a close look at these candidates. I think it's time for a change in the State House and the State Senate, as well as the national situation. We need to bring better balance back to Washington State for sure, because Washington is not moving in a positive direction at all. And the United States as a whole, I think last I heard, 75% of people said we're moving in the wrong direction. That is not a statistic that we should be proud of. We can certainly do better. So get the old seatbelt on, folks. It's going to be a rough ride, because these elections are going to get very expensive, and they're going to be very intense. So we're going to be following them. We're going to give you the inside line, as always, is what's going on, both state and federal. So stick with us. This is the 12th District. I am Kerry Kandata, and don't forget our news, local news, at 5, 6, and 10 o'clock. And, of course, you can always go back and archive these shows at ncwlife.com. We'll see you next week with an update on the filing week.